So hello, my name is Bridget and I'm from Boroondara Arts. I acknowledge the traditional owners as the original custodians of this land, including the Wurundjeri people in the northern part of our city, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to elders from other communities who may be viewing this today. I would like to welcome you all to today's Open House Melbourne session, along with Robert and Judith from the Kew Historical Society, as we explore and discover the Kew Court House. Before we get started, I just would like to go through some housekeeping for today's session. Today's format is that we'll present a presentation to you all, which covers the architecture, history and heritage of the site, along with some information about some prominent stories and some other interesting things that have happened throughout its lifespan. This session is a Zoom webinar, meaning that the only people who can be seen and heard are myself, Robert and Judith. If you would like to ask a question, there is a Q&A tab which can be found at the bottom of your page. You can also use the chat function to add some comments, but if you would like to ask a question, if you can do this through the question and answer tab, that'd be much appreciated. With the questions, comment throughout the time and we'll try to get through all the questions throughout the session. If not, we'll give you some contact details of the Kew Historical Society so you can follow up with them after the session. This session will be recorded and uploaded to the Open House Melbourne website during the week. So if you've missed something or want to share it with anybody else, you can always come back to it during the week. So housekeeping done. So we're really excited to present, we're really excited to be part of this opportunity for Open House Melbourne program and to share the story of the Kew Court House. So, the Kew Court House and police station complex was built in an era when Melbourne and its suburbs were booming. Together with the adjoining post office, the courthouse and police station were hailed as the most conspicuous pile of buildings in the Kew's business centre when completed at the junction of High Street, then known as Bulleen Road, and Cotham Road in 1888. Functioning as a courthouse and a police station up until the late 1990s, it was sold to the City of Boroondara from the state government in 2007. And today you will hear how a passionate community campaign led by the Kew Historical Society made that happen. Now the site is a hub for community arts and culture and is home to Boroondara Arts along with Kew Historical Society, Kew Arts and Immersion 21. Today, Robert and Judith will be sharing with us the story of this historical and much loved site in Kew. So Judith, welcome. Are you able to tell us about how the Kew Courthouse came to be?
Thank you, Bridget. Yes, well, to start with, this is the complex of buildings which we will be guiding you through in a virtual tour today, generally known as the Kew Courthouse. It was listed on the Heritage Victoria database from, I think, 1999, and I'll just start by quoting from their statement of significance. The Kew Post Office, Courthouse and Police Station are of significance as one of the most impressive groups of public buildings in Victoria for their successful and early use of the English vernacular freestyle. Elsewhere, this is known as Queen Anne style, and is a landmark in Kew on one of its most prominent sites. So that's part of the official citation. Bridget's asked about the significance. We'll go on to that in a moment. I might just point out, though, that we're not visiting the former post office, which is the building on the far right, the rather paler coloured brick. It's now the Postmaster Hotel and was until recently known as QPO Restaurant. It sits at the apex of the triangular shaped piece of land at the corner of Cotham Road and High Street, which was, as Bridget just said, first called Bulleen Road. This portion of land was first bought by Samuel Watts in 1851 as Section 86 in the parish of Boroondara, an area of 32 acres or about 13 hectares. The occupants of this land from the 1850s seem, from this map, to have been a small building of the United Methodist Free Church and Francis Barnard, postmaster and chemist. And then by 1872, the date of this map, William Derrick, who subdivided and sold the land. You can see the triangular shaped portion at the very junction of Cotham Road and Orlean Road, now High Street. You'll hear more about Mr. Barnard later from Robert, and he will also tell you about the campaign in the 1880s by the Kew Borough Council to the Victorian government to use this land for public offices. First a post office, then police quarters and courthouse. This objective was achieved in 1880 and construction of the buildings began in February 1887. By April 1888, the police quarters were occupied and the first cases were heard in the courthouse in May of that year. The style of the architecture is called Queen Anne Revival and features decorative brickwork and stucco, steeply sloping slate roofs and an elegantly finished flesh or spire, which was actually a ventilation vent. It's the small tower spire you can see in the centre of the roof above the elaborate pediment. If you go back to that building. So the little white cupola, spire, flesh in the middle of the courthouse building is architecturally significant, though they were used at times among buildings built at this period, the 1880s. The design of the buildings came under the Department of Public Works, which from 1855 had the responsibility for the design and construction of government and public buildings in Victoria. Courthouses and police lockups and offices were often built next door to each other, but it was unusual to have a post office on the same site as in Kew. These plans of the site in 1887, this one shows the roof and the first floor buildings, first floor rooms. And then the next one shows the ground floor plan with the layout of the rooms. We'll go into some of these rooms in a moment. The chief architect of the Public Works Department from the 1880s through to 1915 was George William Watson, who was responsible for some major buildings in the colony, such as Sunbury Asylum, Bendigo Public Offices, Pentridge Female Prison, and several primary schools, including Kew Primary School. The assistant architect in the late 1880s was John Henry Harvey. Now, he doesn't seem to get much of a Guernsey, but he is credited with the design of our buildings under the supervision of Watson. The elevation, beautifully elegantly drawn views of the building from Orlean Road, now High Street, would have been drawn up initially by Harvey, but he doesn't get a mention. Probably the draftsman may get a little mention, but he was actually responsible for that design of the buildings. Harvey was also an innovative photographer and took many photographs of Victorian public buildings, including this, which is taken from a lantern slide of the Kew Court House complex, sometime before 1925. Now, we know that it would have been before 1925, probably before about 1910, when Harvey was seconded to supervise building works mainly in Gippsland, but also on the far right-hand side, in 1925, a major construction was put up on that site as the Kew War Memorial, honouring those who'd fought in World War I, but constructed in 1925. We'll hear more about that from Robert later. So if we go through some of the buildings, we'll enter through the door on the left-hand side to the police quarters. This is the building you can see in the left-hand slide there. Here, the sergeants' and constables' rooms on the ground floor flank a passageway and staircase. There was also a kitchen, scullery, and 3 cells, which we'll visit in a moment. Upstairs was the accommodation for the police sergeant and his family, with 4 bedrooms and a small bathroom. This is what you can see in the detail of that plan on the right-hand side. Now, these upstairs rooms are those which Kew Historical Society uses as exhibition space now. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later too, along with offices for a community dance company. If we go back to the ground floor, there are 4 doors along High Street, which gets a little confusing. Not all of them still currently in use. But the one to the courthouse is on the left, to the left of the magistrates and clerks' rooms, which is that smaller portion, door 2, I guess you could say. These are separated from the main courtroom by a passageway, and this doorway leads through to a former courtyard, now roofed over and used for community functions, and as a foyer to the Just Theatre. Not just the theatre, it's named after somebody named Just, and that's what the courtroom itself was converted into in much later times. Just to explain a little more about how these buildings were used in the 20th century. Courts of petty sessions, as they were known from the 1850s, were the lowest level of the Victorian court system, but their name was changed to magistrates' courts in 1971. And it was probably in that year that the Kew Court House heard its last case. This photo must have been taken when it was in a rather neglected state. I think this is some broken window pane glass on the bench in front. But that's the Magistrates Bench, and immediately behind that, from our perspective here, was the Clerk of Court's desk. And you can see a little of the very handsome woodwork in Oregon and red pine, which lines the room. The former door at the back of the room, which is the small, what looks quite a small door, but was actually the public door leading to the public gallery, which is that area behind a low wooden balustrade. This came in from the public entrance, which led from the right of this view from High Street. That was the only way the public could come in to the courtroom. This room also had, and still has, stained glass windows in a simple formal design, which you can see here. I don't know whether we can we zoom that any, Bridget, to see the windows? Yes, yes, very simple, but quite effective and allowed enough light in to the room, probably in the days before it may have been gaslit, but certainly before electricity. You can see that the room now is set up for some sort of an event. So this photograph is taken in quite modern times. The Magistrates Court, as an institution, was not formally closed until 1982, and the rooms continued to serve as public briefing and locker rooms until 2002. This occupancy of the Kew site by the police made it the longest continuously used police station in Melbourne. At the very back of this whole area, off a narrow passageway guarded by a heavy iron gate, which you can see in the photograph on the left, this led to 3 cells, which remain today and can be viewed almost as if they were occupied by prisoners behind very heavy heavy wooden doors with a small flap through which the prisoners were fed and orders were given. This is the reconstruction of it, and this aspect of the courthouse, the cells at the back, always intrigues people. They always want to go and see the cells, school children in particular. So that's taken you on a very brief tour of the buildings. I'll hand over to Robert, or back to Bridget, and then over to Robert to continue on the history of the architecture.
Great. Thank you, Judith. It's great to see some of those original drawings. They always fascinate me. Robert, are you able to tell us about what happened in these buildings over time and how it was used and who used it, and if there was any scandalous court cases which took place in there?
Thanks very much, Bridget. I'll do my best, but we're talking about a period of about 130 years, so I've had to be fairly selective in what I talk about. Firstly, I'll describe the use of the site before the current complex was built. Then we'll look at how the courthouse was used and the kind of cases that were held there. Thirdly, we'll view a picture of a major event in 1925, which used these public offices as a backdrop. And finally, we'll leap forward to 2002 when the Kew police station was moved to East Kew. Just before we leave this picture, it's a fantastic photograph taken in 1891. And we know when the photograph was published, so we're absolutely sure about the date. You can see there some of the elements that Judith talked about earlier. So there's a white structure in front of the post office there, and that's the Queen Victoria Jubilee Fountain that was later moved to the Alexandra Gardens in 1925. Next slide, please. Judith has described how the land was originally owned by Samuel Watts, who bought the land in the Crown Land Sales of 1851. This land was soon thereafter used by one of the early Kew pioneers, Francis Barnard. He used it as a pharmacy, but it also doubled as a post office. And you can see in the picture there, Kew Dispensary, which is of course his pharmacy, and the words underneath which say post office. On the left is a picture of Francis Barnard. It was his mayoral photograph when he was mayor of Kew for 3 occasions in the 19th century. And on the right is the photo of the pharmacy. Barnard was also the local registrar of births, deaths and marriages, and he combined these occupations and functions with his terms as mayor. While Barnard's post office was at the junction of High Street and Cotham Road, the nearest police station was in Studley Park Road close to the River Yarra, so it was quite a separate function. Kew became an independent borough in 1860 at the same time as Hawthorn. But because there was no court in Kew, cases were heard in Hawthorn. This was an intolerable situation for the independent borough of Kew. So in the 1880s, the Kew Council lobbied the Victorian government and the Postmaster General for a centralised post office, courthouse and police station. This is another early photograph of the post office here, and you can see the Queen Victoria fountain on the left. Later, as Judith mentioned, there was a huge fig tree which was planted in front. So Judith also said that having 3 functions on the same site was highly unusual. That is post office, police station and courthouse. And it's one of the reasons why the buildings are now deemed to be historically significant, because it was one of the first examples in Victoria where these 3 functions were aligned. Lobbying by councillors was ultimately successful, and the builders began work in 1887, and the 3 parts of the building were opened for use between April and May 1888. Next slide, please. Most court cases in the 19th and early 20th centuries were civil cases heard by local magistrates. These included cases of vagrancy, vandalism, liquor licensing, and escaped livestock. It seems odd to be saying escaped livestock, but one has to remember at the time that Kew in its northern sections was still farmland, and it stayed that way right through to the 1920s. The biggest employer in the district was the Kew Lunatic Asylum, from which inmates sometimes escaped and often appeared before the court. Probably the most famous trial, and we're seeing some newspaper extracts from it then, was the attempted murder of Geoffrey Syme, a newspaper journalist and later manager of the Melbourne Age. The case occurred 108 years ago in 1912. And from the beginning, it was described as a sensational trial right throughout Australia. It's an interesting case as it reveals how Kew was not always a respectable place to live. It also says a lot about class, crime, and newspaper reporting in Australia during this period. The first extract I want to read to you was published in the Adelaide Daily Herald on the 31st of August. On the morning of August the 21st, Ginger Moore entered the dwelling house of Mr. Geoffrey Syme in Studley Park Road. Moore shot Mr. Syme in the arm. In the bedroom, Syme closed with his assailant, and in the struggle which ensued, Moore stabbed him several times in the chest with a pair of snippers. After Moore's capture by the local police, he was imprisoned in the city watch house. 5 days later, he was back in the dock at the Kew Court House. A journalist from the Melbourne Age described the scene. Alan William Moore, 28, was placed in the dock at Kew Court yesterday when 2 capital charges were preferred against him. The court was crowded to its utmost capacity and 6 honorary magistrates sat on the bench. As the public gallery, as Judith has shown you, at the rear of the courtroom was quite small, one has to imagine the main part of the court filled with policemen, witnesses, and court officials. The magistrates would have looked down on this crowded scene from their elevated desk. At this hearing, the accused was committed for trial, which took place later in the month in Melbourne. A report of the trial in the Bundaberg Mail and Burnett Advertiser reveals a lot about class and social attitudes of the day. The death sentence was passed on Alan Moore at the Criminal Court in Melbourne. Moore's appearance is terribly against him. Square-shouldered and sturdy, although of short build, he had a hard, firm mouth, small blue eyes, and red, closely cropped hair. The good news, at least for Ginger Moore, was that the sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. He was also paroled 14 years later in 1928 for good behaviour. Next slide, please. So far, we've talked about the history of the post office, the police station, and the courthouse. Because these were centrally located at the junction of High Street and Cotham Roads, the precinct acted like a city square and became the location for many important civic events. And if you were lucky to have watched the webinar on the Hawthorn Town Hall yesterday, you'll have seen that there are also some really fabulous photographs of the Town Hall with large crowds of people outside. So the Kew Town Hall at this time was down a side street, a very small building which had once been a library. And it wasn't to have its own proper town hall till 1960. So this space in front of the Kew Post Office was probably the largest event you could get to have a public celebration. The most significant of these events, the one you're looking at here, took place in 1925 and was when the newly built Kew War Memorial was opened by the Governor of Victoria. This is one of the most important and iconic photographs of Kew. After the First World War had ended, there'd been a lot of debate about where a Kew or where a war memorial, I can't even get it out, memorial's hard for me, where a war memorial should be built. The Kew Council even conducted a design competition, which they subsequently ignored. Instead, they used the design of a former mayor, which was somewhat scandalous at the time. The new memorial was built in front of the post office, replacing the earlier fountain and the large Moreton Bay fig tree, which you won't see a picture of. During the ceremony, over 5,000 people crowded the intersection. The voices of the Governor and Mayor were amplified from loudspeakers placed on the dome of the memorial. It doesn't really have a dome. They referred to it as in the early days as having a dome, but nowadays we refer to it as a drum, that circular drum on the top of the columns. A guard of honour from the 39th Battalion CMF was present, together with the 1st Kew Troop of Boy Scouts. And after the event, the large frame photograph by the Sears studio was displayed in the Kew Town Hall. It was donated to the Kew Historical Society in 1987 and is usually displayed in our rooms at the Kew Court House. Next slide, please. Finally, let's jump forward 77 years to 2002. I wanted to show you an article about the end of the tenure of the Kew Police, who left the building for a new station in East Kew in 2002. It's probably easiest to actually quote from the article. And I haven't asked you to, oh, very clever, Bridget. Sergeant Sinclair said it would be with a tinge of sadness that the station's 32 uniformed officers would vacate the premises. To mark their time at the station, the police blocked off part of High Street for a final photograph of officers standing outside the building. Sergeant Sinclair said it was the oldest continually used police station in Melbourne and had served the force and public well. The article also highlights a story that means a lot to older police officers and residents, and that's the story of the police station ghost. Kew Police Sergeant Ron Sinclair said the nameless ghost had been sighted twice in the last decade. Sergeant Sinclair said a young policewoman working alone in the building late at night on a night shift about 10 years ago first saw the figure standing at the top of the stairs. The upper level of the building was a residence for the police sergeant and his family until the 1930s, and it's believed he's still there, said Sergeant Sinclair. I'd have to say that while I've been in the police station now hundreds of times, I'm yet to see this famous ghost, but a number of our members swear that they've felt its presence. Anyway, so I hope these examples have given you some idea of the importance of the buildings to the people of Kew and also to the people of Victoria. The complex has an interesting history that can't be conveyed in 10 minutes, so perhaps we'll make a longer movie of it later in the year.
Thank you, Robert. I love a good ghost story, and I reckon I felt him. He's up on those stairs. So, Robert, are you able to tell us how this building came to be an arts and culture hub for the City of Boroondara?
I think I will, Bridget, if I start talking about the heritage and preservation. And on one level, it's a story of how the building was restored, but also how it developed a new use, a new purpose was relevant to the community. This is an old photograph that I've used from 1960, and it shows you the police station on the left and the courthouse on the right. If you stand in front of those buildings now, you'll see that they're immaculately preserved, with much of the same appearance as a resident would have seen when they were first opened in 1888. In 1960, and in 1992, it was a different story due to over 100 years of occupation by court staff and police officers. During that period, many internal alterations were made to accommodate different uses. As well as these, a 130-year-old building deteriorates. Slates slip on the roof, pipes rust, the walls become affected with damp, and the original paintwork becomes so overlaid with successive layers of paint that the original ornamentation is obscured. In 1992, the Kew Post Office had been sold to private enterprise by the Commonwealth Government. Later, the Kew Court House and Police Station were advertised for sale by the Victorian Government in 2007. The Victorian Government assessed the value of the site as $2.1 million, which seemed quite a lot in those days. And they undertook to sell it to the City of Boroondara if they could raise the price and if they could come up with a valid use for the building. This ultimately led to the signing of a memorandum of understanding between the City of Boroondara and the Kew Historical Society. The latter committed to mount a community campaign to raise funds for the restoration. This campaign ran from 2005 to 2007. Over $500,000 was raised by the Historical Society and the people of Melbourne. Restoration began in mid-2007, and the architect who designed the restoration was Kew's most significant architect, Peter Mcintyre. Before we leave this photograph, I want to talk about some of the people who are pictured. At the front is Philip Soybean, dressed in a town crier's outfit. A town crier traditionally made important civic announcements in the streets of the town. Philip was an ex-City of Kew councillor and a member of the Kew Historical Society. He became the face of the campaign and was present, dressed in this outfit, ringing a bell at all fundraising events. He also led the Kew Historical Society's section of the parade, also dressed as the town crier in many Kew festivals. Standing immediately to the right of Philip Slobin in a grey jacket is the architect Peter Mcintyre. Peter is one of the leading post-war architects in Melbourne. He's been a practicing architect since the 1950s, hope I've got the date right, and many of you may know of his work in designing the Olympic pool for the 1956 Olympics. As I've said, he was the architect appointed for the restoration. Beside Peter Mcintyre are two men in dark jackets. They're City of Boroondara councillors, and they're involved right throughout the campaign, and we greatly value their contribution. It's Philip Healy on the left and Jack Wegman on the right. And their support of the campaign, council support generally, was indispensable. Nearly in front are three Historical Society members. Margaret Robinson of Kew Historical Society, Robin Kelly of Balwyn Historical Society, and George Fernando of Camberwell Historical Society. Their presence in the photograph is indicative of how the fundraising campaign was not just a Kew phenomenon, but relevant to the whole of Boroondara. Robin Kelly, at the centre there, is a fantastic cabaret singer, and she held a number of concerts at the Courthouse to raise funds for the campaign. Next slide, please. One important challenge was that while the three buildings have a unified facade, the interior and rear of the buildings are at different levels. The block between the police station and the courthouse slopes steeply towards Cotham Road. And modern principles of design, particularly for government, include the need to ensure buildings are accessible to people with disabilities. So the plans had to include a lift to access the upper floor of the police station and the closing in of that courtyard. And on the left, you can see a 1960s photograph at the top left of the entrance to the cells, and at the bottom left, the open courtyard with a clothesline in it. These new works had to be sympathetic to the heritage listing of the site. Each change required approval by Heritage Victoria. I want to take you now into some aspects of the interior and exterior restoration to give you a sense of the work involved. These works include the replacement of the roof and the linking of the former buildings. The roofs of the complex were covered in a mixture of slate and corrugated iron. Due to the building's age, the corrugated iron was rusted and sometimes leaked. Hence, there was a significant problem with damp in the buildings. Many of the slates have become dislodged, allowing pigeons to enter and colonise the roof space. And during the restoration, they took some interior shots of the pigeon poo and a solitary pigeon who lived in the roof. And these were significant problems. And almost a ton of pigeon poo had to be removed from the roof cavity before they could begin work. I haven't mentioned it in my script, but they also had major problems with asbestos at the courthouse, and much of that had to be removed before the restoration could occur. But getting back to the roof itself, the actual appearance of the roof in the 1960s photographs indicates that all of the slates on the roof were the same colour. But when they actually started investigating it in detail, they realised that there was a central band of grey-green tiles on the roof, which they had to source and replace. These green slates had to be sourced and made according to the original design that Peter showed you earlier. At the back of the main layer is the colour. You can see the part of the flesh that we could move to that slide now. Judith explained that one of the most important design I call it a tower of wood and metal capped with a dome. Judith calls it a spire. It's probably used in the same way. We find euphemisms to describe these things often. There's a similar one on the roof of the Kew Asylum, now called Willsmere, and another similar one by the guiding architect on the roof of Kew Primary School. And they all served a similar purpose, and that is to provide ventilation from the big rooms underneath. They didn't have ceiling fans or air conditioners in those days. The flesh had a decorative as well as a functional element. Only when work began was it discovered that the flesh was only partly attached to the roof and suffered badly from dry rot. Most of the wooden sections had to be replaced and the entire structure stabilised. I was asked by Bridget yesterday about the size of the building. There are some photographs where you can see into that open arch section, and it's almost as if a child could stand inside. The human figures give you some idea of the dimensions of the different part of this tower. I'd like now to read from a heritage report about the kinds of care that had to be taken in the restoration. And it comes from a press report of 2010. Paint stripping from older buildings can be a hazardous task. The City of Boroondara has found an environmentally sustainable solution for the works at the local heritage icon, the Kew Police Station and Courthouse. Council used an organic-based paint stripping alternative as part of the repairs to the rendering on the building facade. Over nearly 3 months, the damaged and unsound render was removed, the paint was stripped, and the render was repainted. Usually paint is removed via high-pressure water cleaning or sandblasting. This is a harsh method and involves combining extreme high amounts of pressure, water and sand, and is highly toxic. It also creates high noise levels. In this green project, the council used a soybean paint stripper. The process used a paint-like substance which is highly effective, non-toxic and biodegradable, and applied by hand. Initially, a bandage is applied much like a leg waxing strip over the top of the paste. It is allowed to dry and then the bandage is stripped off. Noise was kept to a minimum by using the paint stripping alternative. Scraping and bandages are then bagged and sent to the Tippers landfill, so it does not end up in our water supply. The waste and debris don't run off into drains, and the bags and byproducts are biodegradable. I was told by Norm Jackson, who supervised the works for the Kew Council, that they had a problem with the interior paintwork of the police station and courthouse. And that problem was that over the years, they had many layers of lead paint applied to the walls and ceilings. And they did an assessment financially of how much it had cost to remove all that lead paint. And it would have added many millions of dollars to the cost. So they decided for the interiors at least to just paint over the surface. And so now if there's any problems with, if you want to hammer a nail into the walls, you're not allowed just because of the problems with lead. Now, Bridget asked me a long time ago, it seems, about the present usage of the site. And at quite an early stage, there were discussions about the future purpose of the complex. It had been agreed that it would become a community cultural centre, specialising in the performing arts. A new foyer was planned to replace the existing courtyard while preserving its architectural features, such as the windows and the old veranda linking the police station with the cell block. And on the right-hand picture, you can see that old veranda there. And you walk down beside that to get to the cell block complex, which you can see the centre picture is of the entry to the cells. This involved putting a roof over the entire works, a new corrugated iron roof, a new floor, and a ramp to the old cells. The iron door and grills at the entrance to the cells was preserved, while the cells retained their original barrel vaults and at least one, its furnishings. Finally, let's look at the interior of the main building on the site, the courtroom. Remember that it had been used for many years as a police force briefing room and locker room. Even so, most of the original features remained intact. including the varnished cove ceiling, the stained glass windows, and an enormous fireplace, which is unfortunately just out of view, but it's on the right-hand side, just as you enter, as you can see in the first picture. The original foyer furnishings also remained, including the wooden structure at the back of the courthouse, which separated the public gallery from the main part of the court. At the front of the courtroom, which you can see in that left-hand picture, the magistrates' seats were on an elevated platform entered from the rooms behind. The original function and furnishings were unsuited to a performing arts venue. So the elevated wooden platform for the magistrates was removed and replaced by a movable stage. I often get asked what happened to those furnishings. The clerk of court's desk in the front there is still within the courthouse and is sometimes used for bookings. The magistrate's desk, I believe, is now at the the Hawthorn Town Hall. The other part of the furnishings was the railing, which separated the public gallery and the court with its seats for witnesses. And that was moved to the new foyer, where it now serves as seats for audiences who are waiting for performances. The original fireplace and the ventilation shaft and the wooden ceiling linking the courtroom and the tower remain intact. All restoration works were completed by the builders in 2011, and the City of Boroondara received an award for excellence in preservation and conservation. So that's all from me now, and I'll pass back to you, Bridget.
Thanks, Robert. So, Judith, can you tell us what happens in the building today?
Yes, Bridget and Robert, you and guests to this webinar, you can see a view of the Just Theatre looking towards the stage area. You can see where the curtains are and lighting and so on. So those windows on the left, the same stained glass windows as we saw before, they face out onto High Street. So the Just Theatre, we'll come back to the Just Theatre in a few moments, but we have talked about the fact that the whole complex was purchased in 2007 from the Victorian government by the City of Boroondara, and they manage its facilities now. As Robert has described in great detail, the restoration of the buildings was undertaken in a way that ensures the retention of their heritage features, but still allows for them to be used as a valuable arts and cultural centre for the community and beyond. There are three main tenants of the courthouse buildings at the moment. We hope this will be able to continue in these uncertain times. Emotion 21 Dance Company is a not-for-profit organisation providing dance and fitness programs for children and young adults with Down syndrome. It was formed in 2009. It has branches across Victoria, Kew being one of the main ones. And it aims to enhance lives and change perceptions of Down syndrome within society through dance, fitness and performance. Kew Art is an organisation supporting visual artists who have physical and intellectual disabilities. This group occupies the 4 rooms on the ground floor, which were the police quarters, so in the original police station part of the building. They're now converted to display space, office and lovely galleries displaying artworks by the participants in the Kew Art programs. And then of course there's us, Kew Historical Society. Thanks to the City of Boroondara, and in recognition of our effort to raise $500,000 of that 2.1 million, which was set by the state government as the value of the property for the preservation of the buildings, we have continuing use of part of the complex. We occupy 2 rooms upstairs, one which is a display room open at all times that the building is open to the public, and the other is a secure room, which is part office and part exhibition space. The photograph on the left shows that open room with one of the exhibitions the actual opening, I believe, of that exhibition. The Society aims to mount 3 exhibitions per year, not this year, sadly, based on subjects of interest to Kew residents, current themes in society, commemoration of particular events, and some of the holdings from our very extensive archives collections. Our current exhibition is called On Parade, 46 Years of the Kew Festival, and particularly features images of the parade, which was an important element of the festival. As you can tell, it's been going for 46 years. And it's involved many community groups and businesses. This parade would wind its way up High Street, past the Courthouse, just outside those stained glass windows. So that's more or less what you can see to the left of the photo on the right. The children taking part in the parade were probably scouts, cubs rather, primary school children. And we think this particular parade, which probably took place in about 1990, it might have had an environmental theme. That was sometimes a focus of parades, a particular theme. But the green, yellow, leaves, flowers, so on, suggests the environmental theme might have been predominant in that particular exhibition, that particular parade. We often have exhibition launches, which are social gatherings, as well as being occasions for the opening of a significant exhibition. And sometimes it may be done by a public figure, such as the Mayor of Boroondara. And I believe that this image on the left would have been taken only last year at our previous large exhibition, probably our largest ever exhibition, which was on the Chairman and Mayors of Kew. I'll come back to that in a moment. As it can't be, back to the exhibition called On Parade, which of course can't be viewed in reality at the moment, it's been put online on the Kew Historical Society's website, and I think we'd be able to give you the details of that in a moment, but you could just look up Kew Historical Society.
Judith, I've just popped it in the chat for everybody so that they can view it later.
Oh, good, good. Thank you, Bridget. On our website, you can also read about our other activities, although most of these are, of course, on hold at the moment. They normally include monthly lectures, research in answer to specific inquiries about Kew's history, maintenance of our collection and archives, and the publication of a newsletter and an e-bulletin. Our members also contribute quite significantly to the Victorian Collections database, and I think we might have the link to that as well on the chat. Victorian Collections. If not, you can get it through the Historical Society's website. This adds images and descriptions of items from our extensive collections to that database. Then a major activity we engaged in last year was research and photography for a book called From Municipality to City, Chairman and Mayors of Kew, 1861 to 1994. It features photographs of all the mayors and text about each contributed by family members and Kew Historical Society researchers. As well as these regular tenants, so Kew Arts, Emotion 21 and us, other community organisations can use the Foyer area, which we've heard about previously. This area, this shows it. Robert showed you, I think, an image of it in the process of being redeveloped. You can see where that old veranda, which was once outside, now spreads along the left-hand edge. You can even see that little bit of the balustrade down the centre of this image, which was part of the courthouse, the part that separated, yes, thanks, where you zoom in on it, separated the public gallery. Very handsome piece of woodwork, so it's very good to have that preserved. The foyer area looks quite empty in this photograph, but frequently it's absolutely buzzing with activity, particularly if there is there's a function going to happen in the Just Theatre. Now, the Just Theatre is off to the left at the rear, and it's very often used for theatrical musical performances, lectures, art exhibitions. This image is actually at that same launch of our book, Chairman and Mayors from Municipality to City, Chairman and Mayors of Kew. And this was quite a large event because we did invite any relatives, descendants we could contact of all the existing mayors up until 1994. So it was both the launch of the book and the end of the exhibition, and carried out by the then Mayor, Councillor Jane Addis. Well, thank you for your attention. We hope that you'll enjoy seeing the buildings, either in the flesh or perhaps still online, and perhaps you'll actually visit inside. If you're interested in joining Kew Historical Society and visiting our exhibitions when they can take place again, we would certainly welcome you. Thank you.
Thanks, Judith, and thanks, Robert, for your great presentation. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free. Oh, we've got a question here. Oh, that was just, thanks very much. That's a great question. No worries. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, we've got a couple of minutes left. As Judith mentioned before, that this site is a dynamic hub of activities, including performance, workshops, exhibitions and displays. And it's home to local arts and culture groups and has a variety of spaces that can be hired for the community for performance, meeting and rehearsals. So here's some of just Boroondara arts events in action over the last couple of years since it's been redeveloped. So yeah, so does anybody have any questions at all? While we ask, I just would like to know, because I love asking historians this, but do you guys have any favourite stories about the Kew Court House that you haven't already mentioned that you might be of interest to the public?
You got me there, Bridget.
I know.
Oh, one thing that I could perhaps say was an exhibition that I was involved with, which did draw in a lot of people, including a lot of school children. And that was an exhibition on Scouts and Guides in Kew. So we put out the word to people who had been involved with Scouts and Guides. And so we had some of the current groups of Scouts anyway, and the younger members come to view it, and also school children. And they were all quite intrigued. I must say there was one image that stood out for most of them, which was of Scouts going swimming in the Yarra River. Now, they did wear bathers, but their bathers were very strange, and the kids used to laugh at their strange togs as worn in about the early 1950s. So sometimes people will find amusing things in the images that we show. Sometimes they're very serious, but we do love it when people come and visit, and particularly in the case of those ones, there were groups of people, and the children, school children particularly, engaged with those the exhibition and even asked questions about it.
I thought it would be just funny for them to go, thinking it was funny to go swim in the Yarra.
Yes.
Who does that? Crazy people.
As well.
Comment, Bridget. For the last 2 years, we've had guided tours of the courthouse in Open House Melbourne, and we've been able to show people many more tiny details than what we're able to do in a webinar like this. And I've been greatly assisted on those occasions by Brad Miles, one of our previous committee members. When Norm Jackson took me around the courthouse, remember I said he was the project manager in charge of the restoration, he talked to me a lot about the cells, and there's I think 3 of them, and they've got these barrel vaulted ceilings, just brick. And I said to him, "Oh, Norm, what if somebody tried to break through the brick? It doesn't look like a very secure cell to me." And he explained that when they took the roof off of the cells, they found that there was a 2-foot block of concrete above those ceilings. The other thing I did last year, which was great fun, was that I ushered all of the people on one of the tours into the police cell and then slammed the door shut. And they were very sort of quiet in there until I opened the flap in the door, and they all looked in quite a relieved way that they weren't going to be kept there for the duration, and they all escaped to the rest of the tour. So there are some very funny stories you can tell about the courthouse.
Yeah, remind me never to be in the same cell as you. We've got the question of when is the courthouse open? So I can answer that from a Boroondara Arts perspective. That at the moment we're closed due to the lockdown and COVID-19 restrictions, unfortunately. But Boroondara Arts is open when we have performances. Kew Arts is open during the week, and it's probably best for you to go to their website, and I can pop those details in an email to all you. So you can go, and they've got a shop and a small gallery. And the Kew Court House, what days are you normally open? Kew Historical Society, sorry, what days are you normally open?
We're open on Fridays and Saturdays between 11 and 1. That's been our traditional opening hours. We may have to adjust that according to regulations in the COVID and we hope post-COVID period.
Yeah.
Normally it has been Fridays and Saturdays between 11 and 1.
Yeah.
But it's all staffed by a roster of volunteers, and there are just never enough people to go around.
No, never.
Hours, as we know, with volunteer activities.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. Well, if you have any more questions for the Kew Historical Society that you might get after this, please feel free to send an email. I also, so in closing, I just wanted to say thank you to all for listening and taking part in this session. It's really nice to have some company this very different Open House Melbourne weekend. After this session, I'm going to send you an email which has some links which may be of interest to you, including the Kew Historical Society's website, where you can find out contact details and also view their online exhibitions, which are fantastic. So that the image that you saw from the on parade of the Kew Festival, you can go view that exhibition. I'll also have a link for you which takes you to a short survey that'll take you approximately 90 seconds to do. And that's just to let us know what you thought of today's session. This special programming is very new to us all, and any encouragement or constructive feedback is welcome so we can continue to deliver these events to you. I'll also include the link to a virtual tour of the Kew Court House, which you can view at your own leisure. It's really great and has lots of details, and you could almost feel like you're in the cell with Robert, or not. Also, please explore our other Boroondara Open House Melbourne sites, and these include the Limehouse Museum and Tay Cregan, Villa Alba and the Hawthorn Arts Centre. All of Boroondara's programming can be found on the Open House Melbourne website or through the City of Boroondara website. I'll pop that information in the email to you as well. I just would like to acknowledge and thank all the staff of Boroondara Arts for their support in helping deliver this online program to you all. Also acknowledge the Public Office of Victoria and Kew Historical Society for the use of their images and artefacts. And finally, thank you, Robert and Judith from the Kew Historical Society. It's been such a joy to chat to you today and to work with you over the last couple of weeks in the preparation of this presentation. It's just been so wonderful to get to know a bit more about Kew Court House, I should say. So thank you so much, and thank you again for all of you for joining us again today. Enjoy your Open House Melbourne weekend. Quick question before we go. Do you have to live in Kew to join the Kew Historical Society?
No, we have members from all around Australia.
Oh, there you go. Everyone join. Thank you. But otherwise, thank you again for listening. Enjoy your Open House Melbourne weekend, and bye for now.